Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be making an argument for Sunni Hadith preservation, mainly basically the reliability of Arabic oral tradition, and this will directly relate to one of the most common contentions made against the reliability of Sunni Hadith. Let's get started. So here's the basic argument, right? And before I go into the argument, one of the most common contentions made by Orientalists against Islamic historical records is that they were transmitted a lot of the transmission was through oral tradition, and that oral traditions are generally unreliable. So in this case, they are unreliable as well. This argument will, although it is a huge proof for Hadith preservation, it will refute that contention as well. So let's get started. Islamic historical records were transmitted by written and oral transmission in the early days. It can be easily proven, and for example, we have the Sahih of Imam Ibn Munabbih, Rahmatullah alayh, a very early hadith work that survives from a very early time period. Now, one of the main arguments hadith preservation is that it was transmitted by oral tradition, and oral tradition is generally unreliable. If an argument, I'll just make a very simple point here. If an argument about other oral traditions, non-Arab oral traditions, being unreliable is a strong argument for hadith being unreliable, right? Then an argument for reliability of Arab oral tradition is an even stronger proof for hadith being reliable, right? And think about this. The other point, because other oral traditions are unreliable, the Arab oral tradition is also unreliable. This is a journal statement, right? This is a journal argument. But if the reliability of Arab oral tradition itself can be proven, then that is a much stronger proof for the reliability of hadith preservation. Why? Because specific arguments are better than journal arguments. No one in their right mind will deny this. Now, basically the approach I'll take is I'll show pre-Islamic poetry. Pre-Islamic poetry was transmitted through Arab oral tradition, and it can be proven very strongly that pre-Islamic poetry is preserved. Pre-Islamic poetry was transmitted through oral tradition for more than 200 years, and early Islamic poetry was transmitted for more than 100 years through oral tradition. Both of these can be shown to be preserved, and it can be easily shown both are preserved. If this is the case, right, this is an argument for reliability of ahadith, because this shows the reliability of Arab oral tradition. And let me explain why it's an argument for reliability of hadith. Think about the reason the Arab oral tradition is basically the oral tradition being unreliable is an argument against hadith. The reason is that the method of transmission is unreliable, right? By the same logic, if it can be shown that Arab oral tradition is reliable, then this is an argument for hadith preservation, because the method of transmission of ahadith is shown to be reliable. Of course, ahadith were not transmitted only by Arab oral tradition, they were transmitted by written tradition as well. And this can be proven quite easily. But for now, we are just sticking to the point about Arab oral tradition. Now, the way I'll show that pre-Islamic poetry is preserved, I think the logic of my argument is quite clear till now, right? The way I'll prove that pre-Islamic poetry is preserved basically by quoting references from both Muslims and non-Muslim scholarship regarding the reliability of pre-Islamic poetry, and I want you to read these references and understand why they show pre-Islamic poetry is preserved. So basically there was an effort to discredit pre-Islamic poetry as being reliable, right? Now, and that actually failed quite miserably, and it got refuted by both Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'll just quote the references from scholars here who admit this point, and I want you to see how desperate the position of those scholars were who tried to challenge pre-Islamic poetry. First reference is from A.J. Arbery. He's a major scholar. People in the field would know who he is. The sophistry, I hesitate to say, dishonesty of certain of Professor Margolith's argument is only too apparent, quite unworthy of a man who was undoubtedly one of the greatest erudites of his generation. By the way, all of these references are available on Islamic Awareness. I think I think this is a pretty strong refutation from Arbery against one of his fellow Orientalists. I hesitate to say dishonesty. I mean, you can understand how strong the proof for pre-Islamic poetry being preserved is, and how pathetic the arguments against it is. I'll quote a second reference also from Arbery. It can be conceded readily enough that the foregoing arguments make up an impressive case against the authenticity of pre-Islamic poetry. It is only this is basically talking about when someone reads the arguments once, right? It is, and this is talking about right now. He's talking about arguments against the reliability of pre-Islamic poetry being strong. But just listen what he says after that. It is only when the reasons advanced are examined one by one that their combined weight appears to be less than at first encounter. To enumerate the points in rebuttal or mitigation made on the Arab side by writers such as Muhammad Farid Wajdi, Muhammad Lutfi, Jumka, Muhammad Sadiq al Rafi, Muhammad Ahmad al Gamravi, and Muhammad al Khidri, and on the European side by E. Braulich, T. Andrei, G. von Grunbaum, F. Grabielli, and R. Brancher would expand this brief epilogue into dimensions of a full-length dissertation. So again, you can read the reference clearly. He says that initially, when you look at them, these arguments look strong, but when the arguments against pre-Islamic poetry are examined, their weakness becomes self-evident. Now I'll quote even more scholars in this regard. Irfan Shahid is another scholar in this regard. Perhaps the most unsuccessful attempt at interpreting these verses was that of T.S. Margolith in his article on the origins of Arabic poetry. His exegetic effort was not only unsuccessful but was also disastrous, in that it formed one of the bases upon which he rested his case against the authenticity of pre-Islamic poetry. His conclusions of late have been subjected to a searching criticism by Professor A.J. Arbery and have probably been swept away beyond recall. Again, think about this point here. Not only the arguments against pre-Islamic poetry were pathetic, they were extremely pathetic, and this is admitted by even Orientalist scholars. I will give two other references, actually three other references, to prove the point about pre-Islamic poetry being preserved. This is from Hamilton Gibb. It would be as impossible to reconstruct the poetry of Jahiliyyah from the poetry of Umayyad period as it would be to reconstruct Elizabethan from Caroline drama. Now this is making a very significant point here. The poetry in pre-Islamic period is different culturally from the poetry of Umayyad period, and he gives a comparison with English drama. So it would be almost impossible to forge pre-Islamic poetry in the Umayyad period because they are two completely different time scales. It wouldn't be possible for them, and so fabrication of pre-Islamic poetry is quite unlikely. Next reference is from Professor Michael Zettler. For though the critics from Abu Amr al-Ala and Ibn Salam al-Jumahi to Ahlward, Margulit and Taha Hussain have cast doubt both on the reliability of many transmitters of the ancient poetry, their criticisms have generally failed to consider certain important facts that have been brought out in a decisive fashion. One may, I think, grant these doubts at least in their extreme forms as expressed by Margolith and Taha Hussain have been laid to rest through the efforts of later scholars. Again, these references actually show the reliability of pre-Islamic poetry. More than that, they show that the attempts to discredit pre-Islamic poetry failed miserably. I mean, you don't need to take my word on any of this. Read these references. Now, I'll just give one more reference from Michael Zettler on this issue. The poetry of Arabs in the ages which preceded the rise of Islamism were perpetuated by oral tradition, for in ancient times when writing was not used or scarcely used, memory was exercised and strengthened to a degree now almost unknown. In those countries of Arabia where Arabian poetry may be justly considered to have had its origin or have attained its earliest growth, there lived reciters or ravis, as the Arabs called them, who got by heart numerous songs of their poets and recited them, occasionally in public assemblies and private parties. This impression, in essence, has been shared by a great majority of medieval and modern scholars who have dealt with to any degree with Arabic poetry. So the last reference is basically about the reliability of the memory of the Arabs, right? Pre-Islamic Arabs, and the rest of the reference I think were basically a janaza for any claim against the reliability of pre-Islamic poetry, and I think they serve to prove that pre-Islamic poetry was reliably transmitted and hence preserved. Now, why is all this relevant? There is a very simple reason why all of this is relevant. Pre-Islamic poetry was transmitted through Arab oral tradition. If it is transmitted accurately, right, and it is preserved, like it can be shown easily that it is preserved, then that shows that the Arabic oral tradition is reliable. If Arabic oral tradition is reliable, then that is an argument for Hadith preservation, because this shows that the method, one of the methods through which Hadith was transmitted, is reliable. I think this is a very simple argument, and inshallah I think this shreds any claim that any moron brings about basically the Arab oral tradition being unreliable. Why? Because we have something different from the ahadith that we can guarantee was transmitted through pre-Islamic poetry, and that is accepted to be reliably transmitted by both Muslim and non-Muslim scholars. I think this is a very strong proof for the reliability of Arab oral tradition. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. For more refutation of Orientalist grounds and more arguments for the truth of Islam and more refutation of atheists, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please like and support the video. I would really appreciate feedback on these arguments. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.